There's a part of the Bible that doesn't get talked about very often, but once you really see it, you can't unsee it. It's called the Tabernacle of David. At first, it sounds like just another Old Testament detail, another tent, another religious structure. But the more I looked into it, the more I realized this wasn't just a building. It was a statement. So let me set the scene. For years, the Ark of the Covenant, the symbol of God's presence, wasn't even in Jerusalem. It had been captured, returned, moved around, and eventually left in a kind of spiritual storage. And when David becomes king, one of the first things he wants to do isn't expand borders or build monuments. He wants God's presence back at the center. That alone tells you something about David. So he brings the ark to Jerusalem. But here's where things get interesting. He doesn't put it in the tabernacle of Moses. Instead, David sets up a tent, a simple one, and he places the ark inside it. No walls, no inner rooms, no veil. And that detail matters more than we usually realize. Because in Moses' tabernacle, God's presence was hidden behind a thick curtain. Only one person once a year could go in. Everything about it said distance. But David's tabernacle said something completely different. It said access. God wasn't hidden anymore. And what's wild is, God was okay with that. Even more than that, God seemed to welcome it. Now here's another thing that stands out. The focus of this tabernacle wasn't sacrifice. It was worship. David organized musicians, singers, and worship leaders to minister before the Lord continually, day and night, not just during festivals, not just on special occasions. All the time, worship wasn't the opening act. It was the main thing, and David himself didn't stand back as a spectator. When the ark was brought in, David danced. Not politely, not with royal restraint. He danced with everything he had. And yes, it embarrassed people. Even his own wife thought it was undignified. But David didn't care, because in that moment he wasn't a king. He was just someone overwhelmed by God's presence. And here's the part that really gets me. David wasn't a priest. By the law, he didn't have the right to act the way he did. He wore a linen ephod, something priests wore. He stepped into a role he technically wasn't allowed to have. And yet, God didn't reject him. That tells us something deep about God's heart. That maybe God values sincerity over structure, relationship over rules. And this wasn't just a random moment in history. Centuries later, a prophet named Amos talks about this exact tabernacle. God says he will restore the fallen tabernacle of David. Not the temple, not the sacrificial system, David's tabernacle. And for a long time, people didn't really know what that meant. Until the New Testament. In Acts chapter 15, the early church is wrestling with a huge question. Do non-Jewish believers have to follow Jewish law to belong to God? And during that discussion, James stands up and quotes Amos. He basically says, this is that. God is rebuilding the tabernacle of David so that all people can seek him. That's the moment it clicks. The tabernacle of David wasn't just about a tent. It was about a future where God's presence wouldn't be restricted by walls, rituals, or ethnicity. Fast forward to Jesus. When he dies, the veil in the temple is torn in two. The thing David lived symbolically becomes reality. No more separation. No more distance. God moves from tents and temples into hearts. And that's why the tabernacle of David still matters. It reminds us that faith was never meant to be cold or mechanical. Worship was never meant to be a performance. And God was never meant to feel far away. It's an invitation to live with open access, to approach God honestly, to worship, not because everything is perfect, but because he's present. And maybe that's the real legacy of the Tabernacle of David. Not a structure we rebuild, but a way of relating to God we rediscover.